BARK Radio.
What's good, everybody? It's Robo from All Bark back with another video, and today we have my college football week 6 picks. We just came off one of the biggest weeks of the year, loaded with elite matchups, and this week is the complete opposite. Just 2 ranked games across the country this week, and a bunch of really tough looking spreads, honestly. There are some sneaky good looking games though, so before we get into the picks, let's go ahead and recap the week 5 results. Week 5 was a really strong one overall for the picks, going 42-9 picking winners, and another great against the spread record of 30-21. But even more impressive is the record in tight spreads, where I went 17-5 picking games with spreads within a 5-point threshold. So the yearly record continues to improve and now is in a pretty strong spot. But we're right in the midst of conference play now, so let's go ahead and dive into what looks like a pretty ugly week 6, starting with Thursday night. Our lone Thursday night game this week is an ugly one in the Conference USA, with Sam Houston heading out to New Mexico State. New Mexico State did not look bad against the run at New Mexico last week. They held a very solid rushing attack to 120 yards on nearly 40 attempts. They just got abused through the air, but I think that might give them a slight edge in this week's matchup, as Sam Houston is pretty run heavy and has no success through the air, or honestly at all as an offense. I also really don't like their coaching staff, and on the other side, Logan Fife is not that bad of a quarterback for New Mexico State, and Sam Houston's defense ranks dead last in the conference. So give me New Mexico State bouncing back after a rivalry loss, 27-24. Western Kentucky at Delaware is another tough matchup to predict. Delaware has been pretty competitive this year, beating UConn at home and FIU on the road, but it's really tough to fade this Western Kentucky team in conference. They've been a Conference USA powerhouse for years. Maverick McIver, Matthew Henry, and Lavelle Wright are all absolutely balling this season. Last week on the road at Missouri State was definitely enough of a scare that they survived to keep their head on straight on the road again this week. And I just think they're the better team in this matchup. It is scary though, because Delaware can run the football and Western Kentucky doesn't really stop it all that much. So I've got to hope that offense comes to play. I'm going to take the Hilltoppers close, 34-31. South Florida takes on Charlotte this week, and to keep it simple, I really don't know how Charlotte scores in this game. I like South Florida's defensive line a lot, and they had 2 weeks to prepare for this Charlotte offense, who's put really nothing but terrible performances on tape. They looked awful against Rice after Connor Harrell went out, and now he's out for the season. And we all know South Florida is a legitimate Group of 5 playoff spot contender, and not only are they just better in every aspect of the game, but they're at home in a great spot to roll over one of the worst teams in the FBS. I just don't see Byron Brown getting stopped at all here, so give me USF 42-10. New Mexico at San Jose State is a true coin flip game to me. San Jose State looked like a solid team in the preseason, but Walker Egan has not played well consistently, and San Jose State cannot run the football and doesn't even really try to either anymore. New Mexico is a very well coached team. I love Jason Eck, and his teams can show up on the road, as we saw at Michigan and UCLA. I'll take that advantage on the road in this matchup, especially because I think New Mexico has a more trustworthy offense as well. But like I said, it's a complete coin flip type of game with me, especially with San Jose State's inconsistency. But I'm going to go 31-27 Lobos. BYU is back home Friday night, taking on West Virginia, who has looked so bad since the Pitt win a few weeks ago. They can't move the football at all right now. They can't throw whatsoever and have a clear QB problem. The BYU defense is very solid on the other end. Colorado looked decent here and there, but they've got better playmakers, and that was an in-conference road game for BYU. I think the Cougars blow West Virginia out this week because of the defense consistently getting stops and probably forcing some takeaways. I just hope BYU's offense can score enough to cover a near 3 touchdown spread, as they aren't the most explosive team in the world, but I'm going to go with BYU 34-13. Our final Friday night game is Colorado State at San Diego State. The Aztecs have such a terrible offense that's only shown up on occasion this season, but that defense is mean. I think it's one of the best groups in the Mountain West this season, and we saw that last week as they held Northern Illinois to just 3 points on the road. Yes, Northern Illinois' offense is terrible, but outside of the Washington State game, this defensive unit has been fantastic. I gotta think up against another struggling offense in Colorado State that they're able to dominate defensively again, which should give the offense enough opportunity to cover a spread under a touchdown. So I'll go with a 23-14 final. Georgia looks to avenge the Bama loss through Kentucky this week. The Wildcats are pretty terrible offensively, but the defense has been competitive, and Georgia's offense does not really move me much. The O-line's been shaky, the playmakers aren't getting it done, the offense is heavily short yardage based. I think Kentucky can generate some stops here and there to keep this game lower scoring, and will only need a couple points themselves to have a shot at covering a 3 touchdown spread. On the other hand, maybe Georgia comes out hungry after the Bama loss and absolutely whoops up on Kentucky. But we just haven't seen many blowouts from Georgia lately to bet on that being the outcome. So I'll ride with Kentucky to cover this one, but Georgia's going to win comfortably, 31-13. Iowa State at Cincinnati could sneakily be one of the best games of the week. Iowa State is a very well-coached team. They have some playmaker issues, but they've proven they know how to win games. Cincinnati is a very solid team as well. They just beat Kansas on the road, but this Iowa State team is just better on both sides of the ball to me, especially defensively, where they can shut down Cincinnati enough. And they know they're in for a battle, so I don't expect a Cincinnati surprise attack here. Conference road games are tough, especially when I've called Iowa State overrated, and I have a ton of respect for Brandon Sorsby on the other side, but I am going to pick Rocco Becht and the Cyclones to continue to win toss-up games, 27-23. Michigan's off a bye hosting Wisconsin this week, and the Wolverines are far, far superior to Wisconsin in my opinion. This could be a closer final than it should be with how Michigan tends to play, and Wisconsin's run defense is one of the best in the country statistically. A lot of that is due to the pass-heavy schedule so far, though, and Alabama and Maryland, who absolutely love to air it out, and then two bottom feeders who can't run the ball at all. But I do think Wisconsin has some dudes who can give Michigan a little bit of a challenge. However, this could be the Bryce Underwood game where Michigan tries to air it out and pour it on. As they know on the other side, they just can't compete. Michigan's front seven is absolutely disgusting, and Wisconsin's offense is horrible. They can't throw, run, or block, so I like Michigan by 3 scores, 31-10. Illinois is coming off a massive bounce-back win over USC last week, which makes this week game a pretty big sell spot on the road. But honestly, I just think Illinois should mash Purdue. Luke Altmaier typically performs pretty well in these games, and Purdue gave Illinois a massive scare last season. And I just don't think this Purdue team is good at all. Road Illinois has been different this season, as we saw with Indiana, but that matchup was so different, and once they got punched, they just collapsed. I think last week was more the real Illinois, a fringe top 25 team, so Purdue should not be overly competitive here. I like any spread under 10, but I'll go Illini 37-21 for a final. Over to Boston College at Pitt, BC is just a bad football team. I picked Cal straight up as a touchdown underdog last week and was proven right as BC just flat out can't win games. Pitt is coming off a tough loss to Louisville. They had a strong lead for a while and let it slip and ultimately lost by a touchdown to a better team. But at home again this week, they can bounce back against a much worse offense than the Pitt defense can dominate, and defense for that matter. BC's given up a ton this year. I gotta roll with Pitt, especially if Desmond Reed is back this week after missing the Louisville game. I've got the Panthers 34-23. Clemson has really become an unbettable and unwatchable team, honestly. We know they've got a lot of NFL talent littered through the roster, but I don't remember the last time a team has underperformed to this level. Anyways, they're on the road this week at an awful North Carolina team. Clemson has to win this game by 2 scores plus, honestly. A win in itself will be big for them, but they have got to find a way to control a game, and this North Carolina team is bad. They got blown out by UCF and struggled to beat Charlotte. Clemson is so much more talented than these teams, and I gotta think something's in there in a spot like this. So I'll pick Clemson here, although I'm not in love with it, 31-14. Kansas State at Baylor could be a fun one this week. Baylor's offense is electric, but the defense continues to struggle. And Dylan Edwards coming back improved this Kansas State offense a ton. After that bye, we might have finally seen K-State improve from a disastrous start. Even Oklahoma State scored enough points to cover last week against Baylor, so I gotta think K-State can use that momentum and that bad defense to continue scoring here. But Baylor is going to win this game. I feel pretty confident in that. I'll go with a 34-30 final. Air Force has a new starting quarterback in Liam Zarka, and he's been playing great the past 2 weeks, piling up over 250 passing yards per game. But Navy is a superior team again this week, and the Air Force defense looks terrible. Navy's offense can score on pretty much anyone, so I don't mind the over in this game, especially if Air Force continues to score. It's a pretty low total for how these teams have been scoring this season, but as a Service Academy matchup, we almost always see low points as they're both so familiar with each other. I'll side with Navy to get the cover though. I just don't think Air Force is going to get many stops in this game. I'll go 34-20. Army is at UAB this week, taking on a UAB defense that is absolutely terrible. Missed assignments, missed tackles, bad game planning plagued this team. However, UAB can sling the football around, and Army's secondary has been lit up through the air by North Texas and ECU. I feel like this could be one of the higher scoring games of the slate as long as UAB shows up offensively, as they have some advantages and are playing at home here. Army is just not good. We saw that last week. However, UAB's defense is so disastrous, I have to take Army to win this game in a shootout. 35-31. Ohio is on the road in conference play at Ball State this week, and to sum up Ball State's defense, it's pure Swiss cheese. So many holes and chunk plays given up, and on top of that, Ohio has looked very good for much of this season. Parker Navarro and the playmakers are getting it done consistently against good competition, and I really don't see Ball State keeping up long enough to cover a spread of just 2 scores if they get anything going offensively. So I'll take Ohio on the road by 3 scores, 31-13. Wake Forest at Virginia Tech is an ugly matchup and one I really don't mind the under in. I don't have a strong feeling for either team winning the game, honestly. Last week's win over NC State was nice for Tech, but it didn't change my opinion on them much at all. And at the same time, Wake Forest took Georgia Tech to overtime, so we could say both of these teams are bad, coming off of good performances. Kyron Drones is still bad, Robbie Ashford is still bad, but Wake can run the football, and I think they compete in this game at the very least. But again, I wouldn't trust either side, so I'll rock with the home team in Virginia Tech to pick up a close win this week, 24-21. I've cooled off a bit on this Temple team. They scored a ton of points on UMass and Howard, and it really skewed Evan Simon's numbers, which made a lot of people believe in them. But since then, they played Oklahoma and Georgia Tech and just got demolished. That was definitely expected, but a lot of people thought those games would be a little bit closer than they were. And looking at the roster, I'd argue UTSA is better at pretty much every single position to me. The only thing that gives me some pause is it being on the road and Temple's rested, but I just don't believe in Temple being as good as UTSA in the group of 5. So give me UTSA by 10 here, 33-23. UMass is disgustingly bad this season, per usual, but honestly even worse this season. I'd take several, and I mean several FCS teams over UMass, honestly, even with the Minutemen hosting. So I don't have much of an issue taking Western Michigan on the road here, considering they've competed against North Texas and beat Toledo outright. They just had one of their best offensive performances against Rhode Island, and it looks solid enough to cover a spread under 2 touchdowns against UMass, even on the road. So I'll take the Broncos, 35-17. Arizona's back home this week, taking on Oklahoma State, and I think they could definitely blow them out. Noah Fafita can make plays, the defense can string together stops, but I just don't love a 3-touchdown spread here with how Oklahoma State played last week in their first game post Mike Gundy firing. They brought out the full playbook, running some fun stuff and getting a lot of guys involved, and I can see them doing more of the same to hang around a bit in this game too. But by no means is this a slam dunk. As we've seen from Oklahoma State, they could easily revert back to getting pants on the field. I just don't believe in Arizona enough to think they're definitely going to do it. I'll go 35-20 Cats for a final. Penn State disappointed yet again last week as James Franklin continues to lose big games as head coach, and Drew Aller had another forgetful performance. Every time they play a big team, I will always pick against them if the matchup makes sense, but this week is not even close to that type of matchup. They're on the road at a very bad UCLA team, poised to potentially go 0-12 this season after their Northwestern loss. They did finally cover that spread last week, as I actually picked, but I think it's pretty clear from watching that game they are the worst team in the Big Ten, and Penn State typically thrives in this scenario, especially wanting to bounce back from a tough loss. So I'll roll with Penn State on the road as the defense completely shuts the door in this one, 41-10. I really dislike this Texas-Florida game from a betting perspective. I'm not a believer whatsoever in the Texas offense, even if they put up 50 on Sam Houston. And Florida is in full-blown meltdown mode and in the middle of a gauntlet schedule that they've already struggled with. But I've got to think this ends up a close game again, seeing as how Florida has been competitive defensively for 3 quarters against LSU and Miami. I just really need to see Arch Manning perform against a non-bottom feeder before I can pick him on the road as a touchdown favorite. And it wouldn't even shock me if he straight up lost this game, even with how abysmal DJ Lagway in the Florida offense has been. The better bet could be the under with an elite Texas defense, but this total's already super low, so I'd probably rather stay away. I'll take Texas to win a close one this week, 21-17. Bama hosts Vandy this week, and Vanderbilt looks really, really good so far this season. Last week was a clear look-ahead game against a decent Utah State team, and after a slow start, they absolutely handed it to the Aggies. Diego Pavia is balling, the trenches are getting it done, and I definitely see the Doors coming into this game confident and rolling. But Bama just proved last week they're a contender again. I'm sure last year will be on their minds all week as they seek revenge, and they could end up winning this game without too much of a sweat. I just trust Pavia's track record and knowing it's tough to put together a great game the week after beating Georgia on the road. So I'll take Bama by a touchdown, 35-28. Boise State finally looked extremely good last week in that second half against App State, where the defense absolutely dominated, and the offense continues to play solid football, running it down teams' throats and not letting off the gas. But this week is where they could run into a brick wall, taking on Notre Dame, who needs every single game the rest of the way to look dominant if they want a chance at the playoffs. We just saw them dismantle Arkansas last week, and I really could see them doing the same to Boise State here. But 3 touchdowns is a lot to lay for a team with the talent level and pedigree of Boise's. I love Notre Dame's running game, and CJ Carr looks better and better, but the defense could still struggle, and this seems like a decent sell spot after a blowout of that caliber. So give me Notre Dame to win, but not cover this week, 42-24. Virginia shocked a lot of people last week, taking down Florida State in an overtime thriller, and immediately have to reshift focus onto this week's road matchup at another tough opponent in Louisville. Louisville has a great offense with a dynamic running back room that's a little banged up, and a quarterback who can make some plays in Miller Moss. They're super explosive when they're playing good football, and the defense isn't great, but it'll definitely be another test for Chandler Morris to not turn the ball over. I think Virginia is a very well-balanced team who can compete with the majority of the ACC, but because Louisville shouldn't be caught by surprise here, and Virginia is coming off such a big win, I think they keep it rolling this week by a touchdown or more, so I'll go with Louisville, 35-27. Washington at Maryland is a pretty tough game. I think Washington is a more talented team between the two. The Demond Williams and Jonah Coleman duo is very tough to stop unless you're Ohio State, but Maryland did have 2 weeks to prepare for this game. Their defense is athletic and performing really well so far. I think Maryland battles throughout this game, and Malik Washington can definitely deliver for them. So this is an upset watch game for me. I just worry about Maryland being able to stop Coleman on the ground. He's a monster, and they just don't have the guys Ohio State does to prevent scrambles from Demond and win on the inside to slow down Coleman if they need a stop. So I'll take Washington to survive this one close, 27-24. Northwestern hosts Louisiana Monroe this week, and looking at this game, you might wonder why the spread is at just 10 points and think that has to be a lock. But ULM is a very well-coached team. They've been super competitive this season so far outside of the Alabama slaughtering, and Northwestern has a lot of problems themselves with turning the ball over and scoring in general as an offense. So this spread sits here for a reason. However, I definitely think Northwestern has better athletes across the board in this game. And although UCLA is terrible, they slice through that defense like butter in the first half. And I think that rhythm could show up here as well. So I'll take Northwestern to cover, 28-13. Oregon State will again look for their first win this week, but on the road at Appalachian State. App State looked pretty bad last week, but I think they're a better team than that performance. We've seen AJ Swan play better, and Boise State just had their number pulling away in that second half, which was disastrous, and I definitely think the Mountaineers can bounce back from that. Oregon State still sits winless, and I'd imagine they'll be hungry after suffering another gut-wrenching loss to Houston, but they're 0-5 for a reason. That defense got diced in that fourth quarter, as they have all season, and they have zero special teams. And the offense also looks pretty awful at times. I just don't love this team going on the road for their first win, especially if Malik Murphy is a little banged up. It's a toss-up for sure, but I'll roll with App State as a home dog, 31-28. Over to Syracuse at SMU. SMU has had 2 weeks of prep time for this game, and they got to see what the Syracuse offense looked like last week without Steve Angeli, and it was pretty awful. Ricky Collins just is not there yet at all, and Duke absolutely dominated that game. SMU has an offense that can score at will when it's hot, and I just don't see Syracuse's offense creating any momentum here to keep this score close on the road, especially against SMU's secondary, which does have some studs. Give me Kevin Jennings and SMU to absolutely roll over the Orange this week, 38-17. UConn FIU is a pretty tough game to pick, honestly. UConn is up and down. I think they've got better talent than this FIU team and should definitely win this game, but they've had weeks where they just look really rough, and FIU's got playmakers and take over in games like we saw earlier this year against FAU. But FIU is kind of in the same boat and coming off a blowout home loss to Delaware 2 weeks ago. UConn playing at home and coming off a road win should be enough momentum to propel them to a stronger performance here. But FIU definitely has a chance to compete in this game, so it'll make that spread a tough call. But I'll go with UConn to pick up their third straight close win this week, 33-27. James Madison's on the road this week at Georgia State, and simply put, JMU should be able to dominate this game. Their defense just completely outclasses Georgia Southern, who is way better than Georgia State to me. I have Georgia State ranked in the bottom 10 of the entire FBS, and even on the road, I have full faith in James Madison winning this game by at least 2 to 3 scores, with their offense having a major advantage as well. There's real blowout potential if they're playing clean football, so I gotta roll with Alonzo Barnett and the Dukes just being a way better football team than Georgia State here, 41-14. To the MAC with Central Michigan at Akron. Ben Finley missed last week with an injury and may be out again this week, and although he is bad, it looked even worse without him. Akron got absolutely zero offensive production against Toledo. Central Michigan's defense is not Toledo's, but they aren't too bad for a MAC team. They've held San Jose State and Eastern Michigan to 27 combined points, so I really do not see how Akron scores here outside of garbage time or some big plays. I've got to roll with Central Michigan here by at least a touchdown, and could see this one end up a blowout if Central comes to play offensively. I just don't think Akron can score. I'll go 27-17 chips. Eastern Michigan at Buffalo is a pretty disgusting game from the looks of it. Buffalo starting quarterback Taquan Roberson missed the UConn game and could be out for this one too. And the backup just doesn't move the offense the way Roberson can. So without him, I don't feel great about picking Buffalo to cover spreads. But Eastern Michigan is a pretty awful team on both sides of the ball. They did pick up win number 1 2 weeks ago at home against Louisiana, but followed it up with a road loss to Central Michigan where they scored just 13 points. And Buffalo is a better team than both of them, and this game is on the road, so I'll take Buffalo to win this one by 2 scores, 34-20. Staying in the MAC again with Miami, Ohio at Northern Illinois, Miami, Ohio quarterback Daquan Finn missed last week's game, but he could be back for this matchup. Northern Illinois' defense is very, very good, completely shutting down opposing offenses so far, but the offense is absolutely terrible. They just lost last week 6-3 to San Diego State. I don't think Miami, Ohio's defense is as good as the Aztecs, and maybe Northern Illinois is due for a bounce back, but the under could be a decent play here if you don't expect any points. I just trust that defense at home to cover the near touchdown spread at the very least. And I actually think they can win out right here if they get anything going offensively. But I'll take Miami if Daquan Finn plays, 20-17. John Mateer is out for Oklahoma, and that's a crushing blow, but luckily they don't play an SEC team this week. It's almost perfect timing for an injury, as they'll get Michael Hawkins some serious reps against one of the worst teams in the FBS in Kent State. Oklahoma should absolutely dominate, and there's a real chance the defense shuts out Kent State completely. But Kent State's been able to score a bit here and there, and I definitely think this game will be about getting Hawkins comfortable for the next couple weeks of SEC play and keeping guys healthy around him. So I just can't trust Oklahoma to put up well over 50 points this week. I think they'll be pretty methodical, so give me Oklahoma here, 45-7. Nebraska is back this week after the bye and coming off a loss to Michigan where they really got dominated in the trenches. Michigan averaged double-digit yards per carry and had something like 30 pressures on the day on Raiola. Just an abysmal day for Nebraska, but they kept it close thanks to a Hail Mary before half and some other drive-extending plays made by Raiola, who I really think is underrated by some as a quarterback because of the whole Mahomes mockery. But watching that game and then knowing Michigan State's offense can also dice you through the air tells me they could score some points in this game. I just know Nebraska's going to get whatever they want on the other end against that Spartan defense. So give me Nebraska to take this one in a higher scoring game than normal Big Ten battles, 34-27. Over to Texas State at Arkansas State. Texas State is the better team here. Arkansas State has some talent on offense, but they just are not performing against solid defenses and just got manhandled by ULM last week. Texas State's defense isn't great, but that offense can flat out score, and I just do not see Arkansas State matching them drive for drive. This one could be a sweat as it's on the road, and I'm sure they'll come to play early, but I've got to trust in the better team who's already beaten UTSA on the road earlier this year, especially coming off a bye with extra prep time for this one. Texas State by 2 to 3 scores, 37-21. Next is Coastal Carolina at Old Dominion. Old Dominion's coming off of a home win over Liberty where I kind of figured they'd play a little slower offensively, and Liberty's defense would get some stops. But this is still a very good Group of 5 team that can dominate games offensively when they're rolling. And although we saw Coastal Carolina manhandle South Alabama 2 weeks ago, the rest of their season still shows they are not a good team this season, and they weren't supposed to be preseason either. This spread is getting pretty high though, and Coastal Carolina could use that momentum to strike early on in this game. I'll take them to maybe backdoor cover this week, but Old Dominion to win without much of a sweat, 38-21. I picked against Houston on the spread last week against a winless team because I just didn't think Houston was as good as their record had shown, and they proved me right, narrowly escaping the upset against a bad Oregon State team. But they still are undefeated and putting that to serious test here against Texas Tech, who in my opinion is one of the 10 best teams in all of college football. They just decimated Utah and got a bye week to refocus for this matchup. I think there's a chance Houston gets blown out of the building here if Texas Tech plays the way they did in that Utah game. Willie Fritz is a very respectable coach, but Baron Morton is back healthy and ready to go. So I'll take the Red Raiders to win this one on the road, 35-17. UNLV is on the road in Laramie this week, taking on Wyoming. Wyoming is built pretty similar to Northern Illinois, a very stout defense with absolutely zero offense themselves, which makes it very tough to win games, but they're often going to be in them. And UNLV is one of those teams that they're going to be extremely tough to beat as they just have the playmakers that can get you points late in the game. The UNLV defense is pretty bad, but I just don't know if Wyoming will find enough offense to pull off an upset here. However, I really do trust their defense to keep them in this game at the least. But with that spread at just a field goal, I'll side with UNLV to pull it out, 31-24. Troy, South Alabama is a toss-up game for me. South Alabama's offense has played very well all year up until the Coastal Carolina game, which was a disaster. And even then, they responded the following week with 22 points against North Texas on the road, who has played some great defense at home this season. So I definitely think they can score, but Troy does have a pretty stout defense with a Group of 5 at the same time. And South Alabama's defense is definitely not one I'd ever have trust in. I think Troy could find enough offense here at home under the lights to win, but like I said, it's not a lock in my opinion. I'll take Troy close, 27-21. Next is FAU at Rice. Florida Atlantic did look fairly decent last week, hanging around with Memphis a little bit, But eventually Memphis pulled away, and they ran all over the Owls defense. Greg Desroches ran for over 200 yards himself, and that's exactly what Rice wants to do. They don't really look to throw it at all other than in long downs and surprise passes, so Rice could have a huge advantage on the ground in this game, and the defense has been pretty good for the majority of the season. I can see that impacting FAU's passing game enough to stave off a big day from the Owls offense, so I'll roll with Rice to get it done at home this week, 30-23. Ohio State hosts Minnesota this week in a night game that they should honestly control wire to wire. Minnesota has some real problems right now and does not look good at all despite beating Rutgers last week. They should have won that game much more comfortably than they did, but that running back room is super banged up, and they're not playing well looking at that game as well as the Cal loss. Ohio State's defense is absolutely dominant and just shut down Washington's offense, who I think has a lot more talent across the board than Minnesota's group right now. And that was on the road as well. I think we continue to see that defense dominate, and the offense continues to grow with the youth. Ohio State takes this one big, 38-10. Florida State just lost to Virginia last Friday, and now has to play a much better team in Miami. Miami is playing like a top 3 team in the country right now, and they've got one of the best offensive lines in the country and a ton of playmakers. Not to mention the defense with a freak pass rusher in Ruben Bain. This is a very tough game for Florida State, but I'm not going to write them off just yet. I knew Virginia could give them trouble, and I also know Florida State can bounce back here. They've got talent and a home crowd that can make this game interesting. So although I think there's a chance FSU could unravel and Miami takes them for a ride, I'm going to side with this being a very good game where Florida State hangs in tight. But Miami is just a better team to me, and we'll take this one straight up on the road, 30-27. Texas A&M is one of my top 5 teams in the country right now, or at the very least close to it. They look so good defensively, and the offense has some serious playmaking talent, but they're going to get tested this week at home by Mississippi State. This team has earned a lot of respect and has a real argument for the top 25 as they nearly upset Tennessee a week ago. I think Blake Shapen and Fluff Buffalo played some really solid football, and that defense can cover. I'm expecting them to hang around this game for a while, although A&M has just too much for me to not take them to win this game, and it probably will be by at least a touchdown. I just don't love the spread over 2 touchdowns at all, honestly. Mississippi State has been very competitive, so I'll go A&M 31-21. Colorado is at TCU this week, and I still really like this TCU team after the Arizona State loss. Josh Hoover is one of the better quarterbacks in the country still, and he's got a lot of weapons around him. That defense is still the strength of this team, honestly, especially in the secondary with Bud Clark, who's one of my favorite guys to watch in the country. They really made Arizona State work for points last week and lost that game by just a field goal on the road. I don't think this Colorado team compares to them at all across the board. Not at quarterback, not at O-line, not at defense. And no shade to Dion as he's still growing, but not in the coaching staff department either. Give me TCU all day at home in a bounce back spot, 38-20. Kansas is on the road at UCF this week, looking to avenge last week's home loss to Cincinnati. And while that was a pretty telling loss as to where Kansas is as a team right now, I think this one should be a win for them on the road. I just think they're a clearly better team than UCF. They've got a better line, arguably a better defense, and a better quarterback leading the way. They've got to play well this week to bounce back from that Cincy loss, who was just a very slept-on opponent I thought was right there with them in talent-wise. And UCF is not that to me at all. So give me Kansas on the road this week, 34-24. Tulsa is in a very solid spot as a program thanks to Trey Lamb's efforts in his first year as head coach. They beat Oklahoma State and competed enough with Tulane to suggest they're making strides to compete with great Group of 5 programs. But this is a pretty tough spot on the road for them. Having to play back-to-back elite Group of 5 teams is not ideal, especially when it's at Memphis in the second leg. They can be physical and run all over you when they're rolling, just like they did to FAU last week, but I really do respect Tulsa, and I think Tulane is better than Memphis, especially defensively. So 3 scores is a bit too high for me. I'll roll with Memphis pretty comfortably, but Tulsa is going to find a way to cover. 38-21. Duke is on the road this week at Cal, with both teams coming off of road wins in the ACC last week. Duke absolutely dismantling a banged-up Syracuse team 38-3, and then Cal cashing my 7-point underdog upset pick, beating Boston College straight up on the road thanks to a pretty solid performance out of Jaron Chiave Sangapalatella yet again. So looking at this matchup, I think we could get a fantastic quarterback display in terms of putting elite throws on tape. Darian Mensah is that guy when he's on, and I really think his future is bright. Outside of that, though, I think Duke really took advantage of a vulnerable Cuse team off a massive win over Clemson, and traveling all the way across the country for a very late night game is not a great spot to be in. So it's not my favorite pick by any means, but I'm going to take Cal at home in an upset again, 27-24. Fresno State hosts Nevada this week, and Nevada is a very one-dimensional team. They really want to run the football with a dual-threat quarterback helping that rushing attack, but they aren't having much success yet as they just don't have the talent to compete with a lot of Group of 5 teams. And Fresno State is built to stop this team, honestly. They've got a defense that can stop the run and an offense that should roll all over Nevada. Just a physical football team who has better playmakers and a much stronger defense in this matchup. They're rested off a bye and at home as well, so I have no problem taking Fresno State by more than 2 scores, 35-17. That's it for my Week 6 picks. Let me know your thoughts on the comments below on any of these games, as well as any ideas to have for content on the channel in the future. As always, thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
BARK Radio.